She leaned close and whispered, "No one must know." I should have walked away, but instead I said, then whisper louder. I still remember the first time I met her. It wasn't planned, and maybe that's what made the moment so striking. I had just arrived at my friend's family home for the weekend. His parents were out running errands, and he was upstairs grabbing something, leaving me alone to wander into the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled tick of a clock on the wall. That's when I saw her. She was standing near the counter, a teapot in her hands, pouring steaming liquid into a porcelain cup. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the lace curtains behind her, painting the room in a soft, golden haze. For a second, I thought I'd walked into a photograph. Everything about her was so effortlessly poised, so naturally graceful. Her hair, dark with threads of silver catching the light, was pulled back loosely, a few strands brushing against her cheeks. The lines at the corners of her eyes only made her beauty feel deeper, like every smile and every moment of thought had left its gentle mark there. She looked up, and her gaze met mine. Calm. Observant. A little curious. "You must be my nephew's friend," she said, her voice smooth yet touched with a quiet strength. I nodded, trying not to let the sudden rush of nerves show. "Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." She smiled faintly, tilting her head in a way that made the sunlight catch across her cheekbones. "You're not intruding. Tea?" I stepped closer, the faint aroma of jasmine rising from the cup. She slid a sugar bowl toward me, and when I reached out at the same time, our fingers brushed. Just a light touch, no more than a second. But in that second, I felt the softness of her skin, the warmth lingering from the kettle she had just held. My hand froze. Her eyes flickered briefly to mine, as if she had felt it too, before she gracefully continued stirring her tea. There was nothing dramatic about it. No sudden music, no cinematic pause. Just a brush of skin in a sunlit kitchen. Yet somehow, the room felt different afterward, charged, as though the air itself had leaned in closer. She handed me the second cup. "Sugar?" she asked. "Just one, please," I replied, my voice quieter than I expected. For a moment, we stood in silence, sipping tea. I noticed the way she held her cup delicately, her fingers steady, her posture elegant without effort. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, subtle, floral, something that lingered in the air just enough to make me aware of her presence with every breath I took. And more than anything, I noticed the way she studied me. Not in a bold, intrusive way, but in a way that felt careful, measured, as though she was already guarding something unspoken. That was the first moment I realized she wasn't just my friend's aunt. She was a presence I wouldn't be able to ignore. That evening, the house was louder, filled with the warmth of conversation and clinking silverware. My friend's family had gathered around the long wooden dining table, the kind that looked like it had carried years of stories, celebrations, and secrets. I sat between my friend and one of his cousins, trying to blend in with the easy rhythm of their family chatter. Plates of roasted chicken, bowls of salad, and steaming bread baskets passed from hand to hand. Everyone seemed at home in this current of voices and laughter. Everyone except me. And yet I didn't feel like an outsider. Not because of the family's welcome, but because of her. She sat across the table, angled slightly toward me, though her attention never lingered long enough for anyone else to notice. She laughed when someone made a joke, smiled when someone else teased, but every so often, her eyes flicked toward me. A glance that lasted just a little too long before she looked away again. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then she asked me to pass the bread. It was such a simple request. Harmless. But when I stretched my hand toward her, the tips of our fingers grazed again, the briefest contact, soft and deliberate, like the memory of the kitchen reaching back to remind me that I hadn't dreamed it. This time, neither of us moved too quickly. My fingers brushed hers a fraction longer than necessary before the loaf was safely in her hands. And in that instant, she gave me the smallest smile, so faint I wondered if anyone else would have even noticed. Then she turned her attention elsewhere, as though nothing had happened. But I noticed. The rest of the dinner blurred in a haze of voices. My friend cracked jokes, his cousins debated about movies, his uncle retold some family story that made everyone laugh, except me. I was caught in the rhythm of her quiet glances, in the way she avoided looking at me too directly, and yet couldn't seem to resist the pull. When her nephew, my friend, asked her a question, she answered with ease, her voice calm and confident. But when her eyes briefly slid toward mine as she finished her sentence, her tone softened in a way I couldn't ignore. It was subtle, but unmistakable. And when she laughed at something across the table, her laughter sounded different, lighter, warmer, almost youthful, as though the years she carried slipped away just for a moment. I couldn't help wondering if it was because I was listening. I tried to steady myself, to remind myself this was nothing. Just kindness. Just warmth. But every time I looked up, she was already looking away, her gaze sliding back into the safety of the family circle. Still, I felt it. The air between us had shifted. Around the table, the conversation was effortless, ordinary. But between her and me, there was a quiet heaviness, like something unsaid had settled there, waiting. And as I sat surrounded by her family, laughing and talking as though nothing unusual was happening, I realized the truth. She and I were having an entirely different conversation. One spoken only in glances, in touches too brief to name, in silences that weighed more than words ever could. It happened in the simplest of places, the hallway. The house was calm that afternoon, the kind of lull that settles after lunch when people drift off for naps or scatter into quiet corners. My friend was upstairs, his parents outside tending the garden. I had stepped into the hall to grab a book from my bag when I saw her coming from the opposite side. The hallway was narrow, lined with old family photos and a small cabinet of porcelain figurines. There wasn't much room to pass without brushing close. I thought about stepping back into the living room to give her space, but before I could move, she was already there, and suddenly, so was the nearness of her. We stopped. Just long enough for me to notice the faint scent of her perfume. Something floral, soft, and unmistakably hers. The air between us seemed to shrink until there was almost none left at all. She lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked directly at me. Not with casual friendliness. Not with the polite distance of an aunt greeting her nephew's friend. This was different. Her eyes held mine with an intensity that made my pulse stumble. And then, almost too softly to hear, she whispered, "No one must know." The words slipped into the air like a secret she hadn't meant to release. Her breath grazed my cheek, warm, close enough to feel. For a moment, the house around us seemed to disappear. All that remained was the sound of the clock ticking in the living room, steady and loud against the silence. I should have stepped back. I should have nodded, reassured her that of course there was nothing to know, that this was innocent. But I didn't. Instead, the corners of my mouth lifted into something I couldn't control, a smile that carried both nervousness and something braver. "Then whisper louder," I murmured back. Her eyes widened just enough for me to see the flicker of surprise. She drew in a quiet breath, her lips parting as though to reply, but no words came. Instead, she pressed them together, a faint smile tugging at the edge as though she was trying not to show it. For a heartbeat, we just stood there, caught in that fragile space between restraint and something neither of us dared name. The hallway seemed too narrow, the air too heavy, the silence too loud. My shoulder almost brushed hers, and though I forced myself not to move closer, every part of me ached with the awareness of her presence. Finally, she broke the stillness with a sigh that was almost a laugh. Shaking her head slightly, she stepped aside, brushing past me in a way that made the sleeve of her cardigan graze my arm. Even that small touch left heat on my skin, a reminder that felt far bigger than it should have. As she walked away, she didn't look back. But the faintest smile lingered on her lips, one she probably didn't even know she was wearing. And I was left standing in the hallway, my heart racing, realizing that whatever this was, it wasn't something I could ignore anymore. The afternoon was unusually still, the kind of quiet that makes even the smallest sounds stand out. A distant hum of cicadas seeped through the open window, blending with the soft creak of the ceiling fan above. I walked into the living room expecting it to be empty. Instead, she was there. She sat curled on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, a book resting lightly in her hands. She wore her reading glasses, which slipped every so often down the bridge of her nose. A strand of hair had fallen loose from behind her ear, framing her face in a way that looked almost too natural, as though the world itself had slowed to capture the moment. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should disturb her. But she looked up, offered me a small, knowing smile, and then lowered her eyes back to the page. It wasn't dismissal, it was an invitation to stay, though unspoken. So I did. I sat in the armchair across from her, pretending to scroll idly on my phone while stealing glances at the way her lips curved faintly as she read, or how her brow furrowed with concentration. The sunlight shifted gradually across the room, painting her in warm tones of gold. Then it happened. Her glasses slid too far this time and slipped right off, tumbling lightly onto the couch beside her. She reached for them, but before she could, I was already halfway out of my chair. "I've got it," I said, picking them up. When I handed them to her, I leaned in closer than I realized. Our faces hovered only inches apart. Close enough to see the faint freckles across her cheek, close enough to notice the small rise and fall of her breath. She froze. So did I. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow down to the space between us, the shallow distance that begged to be crossed but remained uncrossed. My hand lingered just a fraction too long as I returned the glasses, my fingers brushing hers. Her skin was warm, softer than I expected, and when she didn't pull away immediately, the silence thickened. Her eyes lifted to mine. Quiet. Searching. 1,000 things unsaid flickered there in that single gaze. And then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You make this too easy." Her tone wasn't playful, it was tender, conflicted. Like someone standing on the edge of a choice they weren't sure they should make. I wanted to answer, to tell her I didn't mean to make anything easy, that the truth was, being near her made everything harder. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just held her gaze, knowing that if I said anything, I might break the fragile balance holding us in place. Finally, she slipped the glasses back on and leaned back against the couch, exhaling softly. The spell broke. The page of her book turned with a faint rustle, as though nothing had happened. But everything had. Because in that suspended moment of hesitation, we both understood, we were standing at the edge of something neither of us could quite step into, yet neither of us could walk away from. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. One moment, the late evening sky was painted in soft shades of gold. The next, clouds had gathered heavy and dark, as if the entire horizon had swallowed the sun. Rain tapped against the windows first in scattered drops, then in sheets, loud enough to drown the hum of the house. By then, most of the family had disappeared into their rooms, lulled into early sleep by the storm. My friend had retreated upstairs. The house grew quiet, except for the thunder outside. I found myself in the kitchen again. The warm glow of a single lamp lit the space, throwing shadows against the tiled walls. I started a pot of coffee, the rich scent filling the air, grounding me against the storm's chaos. And then I realized, I wasn't alone. She was already there, leaning against the counter, arms folded, watching the rain streak across the glass. The dim light softened her profile, highlighting the curve of her jaw, the thoughtful crease of her brow. "You scared me," I admitted quietly. Her lips curved faintly. "I didn't mean to." I poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, sliding one toward her. She accepted it, our fingers brushing in that now familiar way, light, fleeting, but enough to stir something deeper than the storm. For a while, we stood in silence, the only sounds the rain hammering the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. It should have felt ordinary. But it didn't. She spoke first. Her voice was soft, nearly lost beneath the storm. "You know, it's been a long time since I've felt this." I turned, searching her face. "Felt what?" Her eyes stayed on the window, watching the rain run in rivulets down the glass. "Alive. Aware. Like the air changes when someone walks into the room." She paused, then added almost in a whisper. Like you do. The words struck deeper than I expected. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. I wanted to answer immediately, but I didn't. I waited, letting her words fill the space between us. Finally, I said quietly, I feel it too. She turned then, meeting my gaze. There was no guarded smile this time, no playful deflection. Just raw honesty, vulnerable and unhidden. I can't stop thinking about what this would mean, what people would say if they knew, she admitted, her fingers tightening around the cup. It terrifies me. And yet, her voice faltered. And yet I don't want to step away. I didn't speak. Instead, I reached up, almost without thought, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. My fingertips lingered against her temple, then trailed gently down until they rested at her jaw. She didn't move away. Her eyes closed for just a moment, as though she was memorizing the feeling. When they opened again, there was no denying it, not for her, not for me. The thunder cracked loudly outside, rattling the window panes. But in that kitchen, it felt like the only storm that mattered was the one between us, fragile, reckless, alive. We didn't cross the line. Not yet. But we both knew, the line was closer than ever. The weekend slipped away faster than I wanted it to. By Sunday morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. The sky was gray, the ground still wet, but the air carried that fresh scent that only comes after heavy rain, damp earth, green leaves, a kind of newness that made everything feel temporary, fleeting. My bag was packed, waiting by the door. My friend was busy upstairs, looking for something he'd forgotten, his voice echoing faintly through the house as he moved from room to room. His parents were outside again, fussing over the garden. That left just her and me. She walked me to the front door, keys in hand, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. But the silence between us said otherwise. It wasn't awkward, it was heavy, threaded with everything we hadn't said, everything we hadn't done. Thank you for having me, I murmured, my voice low, not trusting myself to say more. She smiled, but there was something in her eyes, a softness that felt fragile, almost like sorrow. You're welcome here any time, she replied, her voice equally quiet. When she handed me the keys to my car, our fingers touched again, and neither of us pulled away right away. It was such a small thing, skin against skin, but it carried the weight of the whole weekend, of every glance, every whisper, every unspoken moment. I wanted to tell her everything. That I would carry her words with me, that the world felt different because of her. That leaving felt like stepping away from something I might never find again. Instead, all I managed was, I'll carry this with me. Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. She tilted her head, studying me, and then gave the smallest nod. Some secrets, she whispered, her voice steady but tender, are worth keeping. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a goodbye. It was something else entirely, an acknowledgement that what had passed between us was real, even if it could never be spoken aloud. Outside, the rain had started again, light and misting, dotting the driveway with scattered drops. She stepped out with me beneath the gray sky, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, her hair lifting gently in the cool breeze. For a moment, I thought she might reach for me. For a moment, I thought I might reach for her. But neither of us did. Instead, we stood side by side, so close our arms almost touched, watching the mist curl through the trees. When my friend finally bounded down the stairs and called out a cheerful goodbye, the moment dissolved like smoke. She smiled, the practiced, warm smile of an aunt, a sister, a daughter. But as I turned to leave, I saw it falter, just slightly, when no one else was looking. I opened the car door, my hand resting on the frame. She was still there, standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the house and the gray sky behind her. And though nothing more was said, I knew I would never forget her. Because sometimes, the quietest stories, the ones no one must ever know, are the ones that linger longest. 23.